Hi everyone, Dr. Hall here, and we're going to do the root of the neck. And I've included the trachea and the main bronchi for reference. And I'm going to try to do it on this tilted piece of cardboard so that you can see things a little bit more easily. I don't know how it's going to go. We will give it a try. So the first thing I'm going to put in place, because we're going to look closely at some new blood vessels, particularly new arteries today. The first thing I'm going to put in place is my aortic arch. So the aortic arch is going to be coming up here, and then of course the descending aorta is going to go back behind the root of the lung, and I'm just going to remove that extra Play-Doh for now because we're going to be focusing up here in the root of the neck. So let's go ahead and do our branches off of the aortic arch. So our first one, of course, is going to be the brachiocephalic trunk, which is going to extend out to the right side. And then once that sends off the right common carotid artery, move that out a little bit, which will extend up into the neck, then that vessel becomes the subclavian. On the left side, we don't have a brachiocephalic trunk, so these two arteries are going to take off from the aortic arch itself. I'm going to make a left common carotid. Is going to come directly off the aortic arch and travel superiorly, and then my subclavian is going to come out. So each of those comes directly off the aortic arch. So now we're going to meet some new arteries and revisit an old friend. So the old friend that we're going to meet is the internal thoracic. So you'll recall the internal thoracic comes off of the subclavian artery. There it is on that side. And I'm going to put one on the other side. I'm going to move this a little bit more medially so we have room on the other side. So the new arteries that we're going to meet today are the two arteries that are just opposite, pretty much, the internal thoracic artery. They're in the same neighborhood, so I like to talk about neighborhoods a lot with arteries. The first one is going to take off pretty posteriorly and travel superiorly and go through the transverse foramen of the cervical vertebrae. So that's going to be the vertebral artery. And I'm going to put one in on the other side as well. Just making my little artery. So there is my vertebral artery, and it's very posterior, as you would think, because it's going to go up through the cervical vertebrae. The other artery that we're going to meet that's going to be in the same neighborhood across the street, so to speak, from the internal thoracic is the thyrocervical trunk. Now, anytime we call something a trunk, it's because there are multiple arteries branching off of it. So I'm going to show two. There are more, but I'm just going to show two. So that's the thyrocervical trunk. As you might imagine, it is sending branches to the thyroid gland and to parts of the neck, hence thyrocervical. So this is our new neighborhood, right? So internal thoracic, our old friends, the two new ones are the vertebral arteries and the thyrocervical trunks. If we follow the subclavian artery out farther, once it goes over the first rib, it's going to become the axillary artery, and so we'll see the superior thoracic artery, and then we'll see thoracoacromial, lateral thoracic, then go out to the next neighborhood. We're going to see anterior and posterior circumflex humeral and the subscapular. Okay, so those are our new arteries, and it's time now to add in our nerves that we know and love. So our vagus nerves, of course, are going to be up with the common carotid artery, go on the left side across the aortic arch, and then posterior to the root of the lung. So on the other side now, again, up here with the common carotid, anterior to the subclavian, and then posterior to the root of the lung. Now, for our phrenic nerves, we're going to add a new landmark, because now we're going to be looking at where the phrenic nerves are located up in the neck. And so there's a muscle called the anterior scalene muscle. And that's going to originate on the cervical vertebrae. And then it's going to extend out and attach. Sorry, it's posterior to all these structures, so I probably should have put it down first. And it's going to come out and attach to the first rib. So the reason why this is really useful and a landmark for us is because up in the neck, the phrenic nerve, oh, and I have some really wide ones here. Let me make them a little bit thinner. Oh, it broke. Oh, well, I'll make it work. Up in the neck, we're going to find the phrenic nerve running almost like a racing stripe over that anterior scalene muscle. And then, of course, as you know, it's going to travel anterior to the root of the lung. Didn't quite get my relative positions correct here. Let me change the angle of this just a little bit. That's my anterior scalene muscle. Here's my phrenic nerve, which is going to then come down and go anterior to the root of the lung. So we've got our new blood vessels, we've got our new anterior scalene muscles, and everybody else is an old friend. So now let's go ahead and add in the veins, which of course are anterior to all these other structures. So I've already pre-built, actually reused from my last clay, right? The superior vena cava, left brachiocephalic, right brachiocephalic. And so you'll remember that it's brachiocephalic because brachio means arm and cephalic means head. So here's my internal jugular, right? So this was the subclavian. Once blood from the head drains into it, it's the brachiocephalic. Same thing on the other side. Internal jugular runs with the common carotid. So I had my subclavian vein, and then once I received blood from the head, now it's the brachiocephalic vein into the superior vena cava. We will also see our old friend, the thoracic duct, draining into that junction there. And then we have a new vein that we haven't met yet, which is the external jugular vein. And the external jugular vein is lateral to the internal jugular vein, and it's going to come and empty into the subclavian. It's also much more superficial, so when we learn some more structures of the neck, you'll see that this is actually going to be superficial to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So very superficial, whereas this blood vessel, the internal jugular vein, is very deep and below lots of muscle layers. So let me check our list and make sure that we did everybody that we're supposed to do. Yep, pretty sure we did. So now it's time for review, starting from superficial going deep. So left subclavian vein, left external jugular, receives blood then also from the left internal jugular and fluid from the thoracic duct to become then the left brachiocephalic vein, empties into the superior vena cava. On the right side, subclavian vein, external jugular, internal jugular, brachiocephalic. All right, let's take those off. I'm going to take the thoracic duct with it. Then, old friends, phrenic nerves running anterior to the root of the lung and lateral to the vagus nerves, but we can also see now up in the neck, they're going to run kind of like a racing stripe over the anterior scalene muscle. So that's going to be a really useful landmark for us because it really runs right along the surface of the anterior scalene muscle. So I'm going to remove those just so that we can clear out our field of view a little bit. Oh, I lost an artery. Okay, I moved this one. Okay, so we have a new neighborhood that we learned about. We already knew the internal thoracic arteries, and now we know that opposite them, right across the street, but in the same neighborhood, we have the thyrocervical trunk laterally and the vertebral artery, which is going to be medial and deep. So again, thyrocervical trunk, vertebral artery. The vagus nerve is traveling along with the common carotids and posterior to the root of the lung. And so we'll just review our major arteries again. So we have our aortic arch, brachiocephalic trunk on the right, which branches into the right common carotid and the right subclavian. And then the left common carotid artery comes directly off the aortic arch, and the left subclavian artery comes directly off the aortic arch. So this new neighborhood that we learned about, these are branches off of the subclavian on each side. And that's it for root of the neck.